Nam Kiwanuka is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
University Life teaches students many things. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Tonight, journalist and author Eternity Martis is here on what she learned on campus about race and growing up in Ontario. That's tonight on the agenda in the summer. Heading off to university is a defining time for many young people. And it certainly was for Eternity Martis, as she documents in her new book, They Said This Would Be Fun, Race, Campus Life, and Growing Up. She's also senior editor at Extra. And it's nice to welcome Eternity Martis to our studio tonight. Hi.
Hi.
It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
So I grew up in London, Ontario,
Okay.
and it was really nice to read a book about someone's experience in university. Fantastic book. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Your family must be very proud, especially your grandfather.
Yes.
Because this was one of his wishes for you to write.
It was.
Yeah.
It was one of his wishes to go to university, and he actually wanted me to kind of go into something like nursing. And I was like, I want to write, and he's like, let's do it. So he's very excited about it.
So why did you choose Western University for school?
Well, I chose Western because I was an only child, and I came from this family that was a little bit overprotective, only child, only grandchild. And so in high school, I didn't really have that many friends until I was about 15, 16. And everyone was kind of having fun, going to house parties and all that. And I was like, I think I'm missing something. So I looked at the lookbook for Western, and I'm like, this looks like a kind of fun school to go to and kind of take back all that time I didn't get to have fun in high school. So that was one of the reasons why I went, aside from a great program. And I took my best friend, and we went to Western.
So when you finally got to Western, what did you find?
A lot of things. I think like a lot of the book is about Western in London. And coming from Toronto, it wasn't that I was exempt from anti-Black racism, but I had left as a child. And so going into this place that wasn't as multicultural, there's a lot of kind of innocent-seeming comments like, I love Black people, or I've never seen a Black person in London. And I thought it was kind of funny, but then I started to find that these comments were a bit more malicious. So a lot of name-calling, a lot of derogatory names being thrown at me. I once went to a party, and a couple of students showed up in blackface. And so things that I wasn't used to back home were happening in this environment that I was new to. And I didn't really know how to talk about it because back home, I had never experienced these things.
And your family never talked about race?
They hadn't. So my mom's side of the family, who I live with and I grew up with, they are Pakistani, and they came from Karachi in the 1970s. And so they had experienced that when they had come to Toronto, but it seemed to be a different brand of racism for them. So I think for them, they thought that coming, bringing their family here, having children, having grandchildren, that racism would have been long gone. But here I was experiencing something that was quite different from the anti-brown racism they were experiencing. It was anti-Black, and as the only Black person in my family, it was really hard for them to kind of understand what that meant and what that looked like.
I would like to read something that you write in the book. You write, most public space is white space. Parks, museums, schools, neighborhoods, restaurants, places with middle-class values are still predominantly accessed by white people. Non-white bodies are hypervisible and heavily surveilled in these spaces. If we want to pass through without trouble, we have to appear non-threatening. We have to dress, speak, and act in ways that are compatible with the other people in these spaces. How did you come to that realization?
I think I came to that realization, I would say very close to the end of September of my first year. I rarely saw another Black person. It was very rare for me. And when I did, I would be like, oh, let's make eye contact, and nobody would. and all the other black students would put their heads down. And I quickly realized that being seen together was almost a way to kind of put a target on your own back, because at one point you're hyper visible, but you're also invisible.
But you would think that if you see someone you can identify with, it's like companionship, stronger in numbers. But that wasn't the case?
Not at all. And I would look at people and I'd be like, we'd smile so that we were in this together, and nobody would ever look back. And I think it was just, you felt so oppressed in that situation, just being that one black person in a group full of other people who were not black, that when you saw another person, you were just so worried about what the reaction would be. And there's a scene in the book where I'm actually on a bus and no one is sitting beside me, and a black girl, she looks around everywhere to find another seat, and then she ends up sitting beside me, but she won't look at me, and the woman holding the pole asks if we're related. And so I think there's just this, in an environment like that, you want to avoid being together as much as possible.
Why is that?
I think there's a lot of fear when there's a group of black people, and I think that sometimes when we're having fun or we're joking, that joy is seen as threatening. And you stand out on campus, and people would look at us. Later in my third year and fourth year, I did meet some really great black women, and we would hang out together, but we would laugh, I'd turn around and see everyone staring at us.
What was it like in class?
Class was interesting.
Interesting is not a good word, because it's such a big word.
Class was, it could be very hard to navigate. So a lot of times I was the only black person in the class. A lot of times people wouldn't actually sit beside me, and there would be a lot of comments, and they were sometimes microaggressions, but they were also very explicit.
What are microaggressions?
So microaggressions are just very subtle kind of forms of racism, like, talking about someone's hair, or saying like, oh, you must be, happy to be in this class. You're the only black person here. And it doesn't seem like something malicious, but over time it kind of builds.
It othered you.
Yes, it did. So I'd be in class, and there was one student who was like, I don't know why we're talking about slavery. Why don't you get over it? And as the only black person in class, everyone's looking to you, the professor's looking to you to answer that. And so it could be very alienating.
At the beginning, you talked about how when you went to Western, you were, I guess, in your late teens.
Yes.
And going to Western does have this reputation, having grown up there, as being this school where you can have a lot of fun. It's a very good school academically, but also known for its parties. So when you did go to these events, the social events, what was it like for you?
The social events were really difficult. So I didn't do a whole lot on campus. I mostly went out in the city. And I found them also very alienating. But I think it's worse because people are partying and they're drinking, so they're drunk and they're approaching you. Every single night I had someone approaching me saying something like, we've never seen black people here, or there's never been a black girl in this space, and calling me all kinds of names. And so it felt like partying felt like a great way to kind of get into that Western spirit, but at the same time, for someone like me, it almost made things worse.
Why did it make things worse?
It made things worse because in class you hear these things, but people are not drunk. I think alcohol has a really potent effect on racism, especially in those spaces. And so I just kind of felt isolated. Sometimes I felt deeply vulnerable. A lot of times I would actually be threatened with violence and assault by other bar goers for doing something as simple as being like, hey, leave me alone, or leave my friend alone, she doesn't want to dance with you. And so
you have this one story where you're standing in the middle of the street and a black gentleman is in a car.
Yeah.
That was bone chilling. What almost happened to you?
Yes. So I was at a bar, and in this chapter, I talk a lot about violence against women in bar spaces, but also the difference between my friend and I, who was South Asian, but we obviously don't look alike. And this one gentleman was talking to my friend, and I simply just asked him to stop because he was pulling her arm and he was touching her. She didn't want to dance with him. So I just said, leave her alone. And he got very upset about it, and he left, and we left because we were kind of shaken up. And we were on our way out, and I was crossing the street, and I just heard this car coming. And I started kind of swerving in the middle to see if it was actually coming towards me. I just had a bad feeling, and it was. And the car stopped millimeters from my shin, and it was this guy who was harassing my friend, and he rolled down the window. And he basically was telling me, I was going to hit you. I would hit you because you've annoyed me. And for the rest of the years, I had I think 2 more years at Western, I would see him and he would push me and he would shove me. And at one point he actually went through my bag. He opened my bag on the dance floor and all my stuff fell out. And so that experience was just kind of one of many where just saying, you know, leave my friend alone, like as a Black woman, seemed to put men on edge and really believe that they were entitled to hurt me.
I want to read something else from your book. You write, why is it so hard for some people to believe that anyone with beige or brown skin can be from here? Some of this ignorance can be attributed to the homogeneity of university towns, but things are changing. Southwestern Ontario, particularly London, has seen an 8 to 15% shift in demographic over the last decade, with more immigrants moving to the city and students coming in from outside the region. This has brought with it a fear of people of color and an uptick in white nationalism and hate crimes. In 2010, London ranked 5th in Canadian metropolitan areas for police-reported hate crimes. Reported hate crimes in London increased by over half from 2016 to 2017, making it the largest rate in southwestern Ontario. Context theory is that when you meet people different from yourself and you get to know them, existing prejudices fade away. You say that despite more immigrants in the city of London, that wasn't happening. Do you have an understanding of why not?
I do have a bit of an understanding from speaking to experts like Dr. Barbara Perry, and it's that for somewhere like London, which is still pretty homogenous, white, Christian, conservative, the influx of immigrants coming into the city, or not even immigrants, just beige and brown-skinned people coming in kind of sociologically creates this fear of being overtaken and a threat of, you know, job security being in jeopardy and a threat of our values, so to speak, being threatened. And so it almost seemed like at the time, even though there were a ton of us, we had a lot of international students from different parts of the country, especially the Caribbean, from around the world, sorry. And it just seemed like the people got very upset about that. And to see people again in like groups seemed to kind of put people on edge and feel like their own livelihood was being threatened.
You mentioned Dr. Barbara Perry?
Yes.
What does she study?
She studies hate crimes, and she's been tracking hate crimes for a long time now. And she actually helped me with my Vice article that I wrote about London in 2015.
And that was how this book came to be?
Yes.
You confronted people, and in the book you write about different confrontations, and the one that you just told us about. What was the impact of that on you? Because you also write about, you know, you talked about it earlier at Halloween when these two people came up to you and they were wearing blackface.
Yes.
And it felt like as if they were daring you to do something or to react in a way. What kind of impact did that have on you, on your mental state?
I think that when we talk about race and experiencing racism, or just being the fear of being exposed to it, we don't really talk about it in Canada, but it's been well documented in the States. And so for me, a lot of what I was feeling was a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, scared to leave the house, scared that if I left the house, someone could attack me. Around this time, Trayvon Martin was killed, and people were talking about Black bodies being suspicious and deserving of violence if they were suspicious or hostile. And so I've kind of dealt with that by partying, which was this never-ending cycle, and I also dealt with that by eating and just not trusting anyone and not wanting to speak in class. I would stop participating in class because I just felt like everybody had something to say about me being Black, whether it was ignorant or unintentional or malicious. And it's very hard when you don't know anyone else who's going through that to explain that. But these are actually well-documented effects, and the effects of anti-Black racism on people, there are a ton. There's hypertension, there's depression, there's anxiety, feelings of hopelessness, and I felt all that. And as a student, racism also affects your academic performance, and my grades were slipping because I just didn't know what to do, and I just kind of wanted to give up.
And you also wrote about how some of your friends transferred out because of the stress that they were under because of the same thing?
Yes. One of the best things I think for my mental health was finding other students of color and realizing that they were experiencing the exact same things. And what was so chilling about it was that those students I met and students I've met even today, a lot of the experiences are verbatim the same, and how they felt was the same. And so I had a lot of friends either transfer out or drop out of Western. And that's not to say that any other school was better, but they were willing to give it a shot. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, but that was the step they were willing to take to remove themselves from the situation.
We got in touch with Western just to talk to them and see what their point of view was. And I'm just going to read part of their response to us. Racism in any form is not acceptable. Western strongly condemns all forms of hate and racism. The university is working to provide opportunities where all parts of the campus community can come together to talk about how we can move forward in this regard. Earlier this year, Western's president, Alan Shepard, launched a working group to better understand the issues and concerns we face as a community and to target issues of racism on campus. In doing so, it is hoped that this and other initiatives will inform a strategy to move forward in our classrooms and research facilities, in our residences, on our sports fields, indeed, within all aspects of our university fabric. What's your response to that?
I think it's great that they're starting to do something and they're more vocal about it. There was a case with a student recently that had addressed a professor who used the N-word in class and was receiving a lot of hate mail and death threats, and the school and school groups actually came together. And so I'm happy that they're starting to take this more seriously. Mm-hmm. I think involving students and having all kinds of working groups, not just decisions being made at an administrative level, could really start to shift some things.
By second year, you decided to major in English and Women's Studies.
Yes.
And a lot of this book covers issues around violence against women and the many forms that it takes. Mm-hmm. You wrote about rape culture on university campuses and the fact that sexual assault is the most reported crime on university campuses. What do you attribute that to?
I think there's a lot of things, and in the book, one of the greatest issues when it comes to rape on campus are frats, like fraternities and sororities. If you are in a fraternity, there's been research that you are 3 times more likely to rape, and if you're a sorority, if you're in a sorority, you are more likely to be raped, and that the first 6 to 8 weeks of school, of Frosh Week, and all those parties are known as the red zone, when you're more likely to be raped if you're a woman. And so I think that there's several factors. I think it's the culture of university where it's this cushion before the real world, where you're allowed to make mistakes. And even if those mistakes are horrific or cost someone else their life or their health, there's this assumption, well, you can get past it. And I think that's especially true for young men. In the book, I talk a lot about the victim blaming around women and how we protect men at all costs. And I think for young men who are accused of rape, there's this fear that we're going to ruin their lives without worrying about what those women who have been raped and the survivors are facing. And so I think alcohol, yes, plays a role. I think there's just a culture around campus life that rape culture exists, and if you get caught in it, I'm sorry, and that's not the way it should be at all.
I think one of the most important things about your book is that not only are you writing from a personal experience, you're also including statistics and data to back up some of the things that you experienced. When you were talking about intimate partner violence, you also shared something that was very personal to you. Yes. You don't have to talk about it if you don't feel comfortable, but what was that experience like, putting that personal, horrific thing that happened to you in the book?
Yeah, I think when we talk about violence against women on campus, we always talk about sexual assault. And one thing that I was curious about, based on my own experience with interpartner violence, is what is happening to the young women on campus who are in abusive relationships, like I was. And I felt alone at the time because you could go around any campus, and I've spoken to professors about this, any campus you go to, there are campaigns against sexual assault, but where are those campaigns if you're in an abusive relationship and you don't know how to leave? And so it felt really important to me to put my own story of being in an abusive relationship in this book, because when I started kind of digging around, I found some research that young women who are about university age are at one of the highest risks of intimate partner violence and intimate partner homicide.
Is there a reason for that?
I couldn't find one, and so I had reached out to someone in the book named Gay Worth. She's a founder, one of the founders of Stepping Up. And it's almost like for dating violence, we target teenagers. And the term domestic violence seems to kind of cover, or there's this assumption that it covers older women, women who are married and in relationships. And so us who fall in the middle in our early 20s, there's no funding, there's no research. The other thing that can be attributed to IPV among young women is that we assume that they're having a time of their lives in university. And we don't really see that boyfriend-girlfriend relationship as something that is as deserving of attention as a husband or a wife.
What about, I'm going to sound like my age. I think you kind of touched on it in the book. Mm-hmm. With the freedom to experiment,
yes.
The freedom to do what you want, and maybe there's a gray area with doing that, like trying to find yourself or being free. That when this stuff happens, that you don't feel as much permission to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for young women now. There are dating apps. We are dating, and casual dating is something that is no longer stigmatized. But it is stigmatized if you were to go to the police and report abuse or assault. It's much harder for a different generation of people, or even just the police force in general, to understand what that means. They might say things like, well, you're only casually dating. Does this qualify? And so we have all these different issues that young women are facing, even social media, where you're cyber stalked or cyber harassed by your partner or blackmailed. And I don't know if police are ready to deal with that, because we haven't even addressed interpartner violence in this particular age group.
In 2015, you wrote an essay for Vice that went viral. You mentioned it already, and you called it "London, Ontario was a racist a-hole to me." What was the reaction from that essay?
It was overwhelmingly positive, and that actually surprised me. I was waiting for trolls to come after me, but I got a lot of people, different groups of people from London actually, who were either shocked this was happening, and we're like, how can I do better? How can I be a better ally to my friends and other people in the city? Mm-hmm. I got responses from people who had left London, who were in their 60s and 70s, being like, nothing has changed. And I also got a lot of responses from people who live in London, who were like, I'm afraid for my life. I am in a interracial relationship. My kids are biracial, and I'm afraid for them. And so I got a lot of just stories, which was really nice to hear, because while writing the book, you don't know if anyone's going to relate. And then that article came out, and everyone was like, yeah, I have some sort of experience with this, whether as that person who has been harassed or a target of racism, or I've seen it and witnessed it.
You say in this book that you still found people in London to be really friendly. Mm-hmm. In what ways?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about the book is that I didn't like London and I didn't like Western. And I actually loved it. I thought it was a great experience for me. And people were there was a small town feel that I didn't get back in Toronto. So you would you'd walk across the street and someone would say good morning. But here, if you say that, people are afraid, they just kind of jump back.
It's like, what do you want?
Yeah, like, what are you gonna do? So down there, people were very nice. Everyone was talking, they chatted with you. If I was at the grocery store, you would strike up a conversation. It had that nice small town feel that I kind of needed to come out of my shell, that I was afraid to do back home.
Is that what you mean when you said that it was a great experience for you?
Yeah, I think for anyone who was like me, who didn't really have much of a social life, so to speak, when you're younger, London was a nice place to kind of learn how to become yourself and do things on your own, because it almost felt like that city is very supportive.
Who's that?
That's me. That is me and my degree.
That's fantastic. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so funny that you said when you went to London, you went to find yourself you found yourself in London.
Yeah.
For me, growing up in London, I mean, I left as soon as I could,
yeah.
17, because Toronto for me was like, that's where I could find myself.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Have things changed there since you were a student?
Do
you know?
I don't know. Like I was saying, I think there was that incident with the girl who was receiving death threats, so that is really disheartening. But I think that the action around these things have changed, and that's really great. Because when I was a student, we weren't really talking about race and gender in a mainstream way. Like news really wasn't really covering it, and so we would like whisper to our friends, like, did that person really say that? But now these groups are really active, and students are kind of rallying for themselves when they realize that if no one's going to stand up for us, we're going to do it. And I think that's the greatest thing that has come out of the last couple of years.
Well, congratulations. It's a fantastic book.
Thank
I
you.
think you've been able to talk about experiences that so many people can relate to and now have a voice to express. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eternity. We recorded that conversation before the Black Lives Matter movement went global and protests to confront anti-Black racism took off. And so we wanted to check in. Hi, Eternity. Nice to see you again. A lot has changed since we last spoke, not only with the COVID pandemic, but the global Black Lives Matter protests. Do you think this time will bring any meaningful change?
Yeah, hi, Nam. I'm hoping it does. I think that, when I wrote my book, they said this would be fun. The first time around, I was talking about the massive global protests following the death of Mike Brown, and that was in 2014. And a lot has happened since then. We've had more protests, but now to see this happen again, something feels a little different this time. And I think it has to do with almost a boiling over of tensions, not just in terms of racial injustice and things we've already been saying about police brutality, but now with the death rates of COVID in the US, and even here that we don't have the data, but Black Americans are 3 times more likely to die of COVID in the US. So I think we've just entered a very different period in time where we're not just fighting against police brutality, but injustice throughout the world.
Do you think it's different in part because of the pandemic?
I think so. And I know the New York Times had done like an opinion poll, and the opinion on Black Lives Matter and racial injustice movements have shifted more in the weeks of protest than in the last 2 years. So I think that this pandemic has kind of shone a light on the gaps and where we are discriminated against and how we suffer. And we're seeing that now in health, right, with COVID. But it's also now we're seeing it in a pandemic. Black people are still being shot by police. And so I think now that everyone's at home and on their computers and interacting with one another, we're able to see that a bit more clearly than we were in the past.
Eternity, thank you so much for this.
Of course, thanks, Nam.
And that's it for tonight's Agenda in the Summer. I'm Nam Kiwanuka. Thanks for watching TVO and for joining us online at tvo.org. And we'll see you again next time.
The Agenda in the Summer with Nam Kiwanuka is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.